Thank you for joining our webinar, How to Build Resiliency for the Next Big Supply Chain Interruption. Our moderator for today's panel is Howard Levy, Vice President of Global Sourcing at Zimmer Biomet. Joining him are Brandy Moranian, Senior Vice President, Global Supply Chain and Procurement at Smith & Nephew, Jody Gilmore, Director of Orthopedics and Strategic Business Development at Elos MedTech, and Victor Swint, CEO of Tecomet. Our webinar sponsor is Millstone Medical Outsourcing, a company focused on helping medical device manufacturers overcome the complexities of packaging and distribution. Millstone has developed best-in-class post-manufacturing services that foster quality compliance and business success, helping OEMs focus on creating products that make a difference in patients' lives.
Welcome to our Supply Chain Resiliency panel today, and thanks for joining us. We have a good group with us today to give you some diverse experiences that we've had over the past year, and it has, believe it or not, been over a year since COVID has hit us. So with that, as the intros provided, I'm going to just jump right into our questions today. And Victor, I'm going to start with you from your perspective as a large global supplier to the industry. When you think about the supply issues that you're faced with and the things that are happening in the industry in general, what keeps you up at night as far as key challenges?
Wow, that's a great question, Howard. So what keeps me up at night? Well, I think there are many things that stay on my mind, but these days, the big thing that keeps me up at night is making sure that we continue to improve our performance, our lead times, our OTD, and continue to partner well with our customers and remain a reliable supplier through what I think might be a pretty aggressive ramp up this year. And so, it could be, as much as 20% a quarter. And so we're really kind of doing a lot of planning and SIOP processes and staying close to our customers. In fact, I talk personally with our customers at least once a quarter, in some cases once a month. And we want to understand what the demand is. And we're talking about ways to smooth demand and to make sure that, we're going to be able to manage this environment and be an excellent supplier for our customers this year. That's my top focus in 2021, making sure that we can respond and manage this ramp up.
Now, do you see any challenges in regards to what could preclude you from doing that as far as, for example, in Michigan, there's another COVID surge going on as we speak. Do you see anything that's causing you that would cause you issues in your supply chain?
Yeah, I stay personally close to what's happening with COVID and our readiness by plant. As you know, we put together weekly readiness charts and capacity charts that kind of let us know how we're doing on COVID in those plants. And I feel like we've done well in terms of responding. We put in place really aggressive business continuity plans with stringent safety guidelines and testing. And so I feel like we're in a good position to keep our team safe and effective. But if something happens, we're on top of it weekly.
Thanks, Victor. Jody, from your perspective as well as a global supplier to the industry, what keeps you up at night as far as supply-related issues or worrying about the customer?
Well, I think what keeps me up at night is just the general high level of uncertainty and the great unknown, the thing that we cannot predict. And I think that over the last 12 months, we have learned that many of the things that we used to be able to count on completely are shifting and changing in ways that we never could have possibly imagined. And, thank you, Howard, for this topic, because it's an incredibly timely one, not just if you look back at the pandemic, but realistically, who could have predicted the pandemic, the extreme winter weather, resource shortages, a container ship stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, massive logistics woes. It goes on. And what this means is that our historical behavior patterns and our tried and true methods are ultimately less effective. And that means that we have to be entrepreneurial, we have to be flexible, we have to adapt.
And don't forget weather in Memphis. That's been a big challenge too.
Yes.
You would expect it with the spring storms.
Yeah, but then I mean, and exactly, and with all of that winter weather, and then just the huge impact. I mean, you hit on it with the plastics and the petrochemical resources in Texas. I mean, it's crazy. It's hard to imagine. And really, all of the most amazing tools we could have had to predict things cannot. So that's why we have to have good plans and business continuity and disaster recovery plans and be able to enable those, because it becomes you're going to be creating that solution as you go along, and you've got to be flexible and you have to adapt.
Well, Jody touched on some of the key things that are going on, the random events, Brandy. Mm-hmm. What do you see as a major OEM to the industry from your perspective that, causes you concerns that you may lose a little bit of sleep at night?
So Jody summed it up pretty well, actually. I'm dealing with, anybody who's managing a supply chain today is dealing with the uncertainty. And every day it's kind of a new one that surfaces. And I think Jody highlighted those pretty well. If I were to add to that, what really concerns me now is the people leading and running the supply chain. And they're working pretty hard 24/7, staying up through the night to try to get product through, despite the uncertainty that comes up every day when a new issue surfaces, whether it is the Suez Canal, obviously, which is probably the most public, but there's quite a few others to include the weather conditions and other things that are happening. I think the volume is creating its own issues that we hadn't seen before, because it's just causing significant stress. So my biggest concern now, in addition to the items that Jody mentioned, are just the morale of people, particularly after a year of COVID, where there were personal issues and stress. And it's not stopping, where we thought maybe that we would be able to take a pause and somehow magically 2021 would have been a restart and, go back to normal, and it's just not. And so I'm really concerned about employee morale, employee retention, pulling on the same resources for the same concerns that we were struggling through last year, and now we've got new ones. So that's probably where I'm kind of staying up at night, wondering and hoping and working with teams to keep their morale up.
Thanks, Brandy. Shifting gears a little bit, Victor, there obviously is the internal challenge of keeping the team, focused and moving forward and, weathering the storm of what we've been going through. How are you working, though, Victor, with your customers to keep the connections fresh, energized? Because, it's the same kind of thing. You can't have the meetings in person, although I know selectively that's started to happen a little bit. How do you keep those connections fresh with your customers?
Yeah, we've tried to be as proactive as possible with our customers. We've done things like heat mapping of our key suppliers and making sure we understand where the biggest risk remains. We've intensified the executive level discussions and relationships that we have with those suppliers as well. We've also developed SIOP processes to make sure, particularly for the ramp up, to make sure that everybody's ready and everybody has capacity in place, and we have priority inside of their companies. And so it's really intensified, a lot of the dialogue that goes on and partnering. We give them our weekly updates on forecasts, and we want to see that they have their forecasts in place too. And so there's been a real tight relationship. We top graded our supply chain team in 2020, and the timing was good. And they're bringing some really excellent processes to the table to help us they stay lockstep with our supply base. And so I feel like we're in a good place there now.
And Brandy, from your perspective with your suppliers, how are you keeping, the connections there, making sure, the new products are going on, the launches, just the day-to-day commitments and requirements? Are you doing anything particular with your suppliers?
We really have improved our management with our new products and the suppliers. We've increased in regards to that focus, added more resources to the team. But it really is where the change due to the resiliency that we need in the supply base that has changed significantly is, the supplier risk and managing our risk and then having mitigation plans in place. We're sort of a second and third priority just because of the day-to-day operations, new product launches, for example, productivity opportunities and things. The team was really focused on that. And because there was a bit of a slowdown in a lot of things last year, and the reliance on supplier mitigating any supplier risk, that became number one priority. So we actually put a much more robust process in place that we've been wanting to do and working on. Now we had the time to, and actually the need to put in more of a supplier risk mitigation plan. What are our backup plans? What are our risk mitigations for our key suppliers? And we also did the same thing, Victor, is identified a heat map globally. And as COVID moved from Asia into Europe and into the US, we tracked our supply base and the mitigation plans based on where COVID was hitting last year. So I think we're in a bit of a better place, and now had the opportunity to really in real time put a risk mitigation supplier plan in place.
And Jody, more from the customer perspective, we normally around this time are planning for the industry leading OMTEC conference, but unfortunately, we're going virtual again. I know, people always take time out to visit the suppliers from the OEMs, and that's an important part of the relationship. And likewise, visiting the customers, but we really haven't been able to do that very much over the past year. What are you doing just to make sure you're aligned with your customers and keeping the relationships, fresh and vibrant when you can't do the face-to-face?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Howard. And I will say that both Brandy and Victor gave great answers about really relying on our tools and a lot of the systems that we have in place. And I'll just layer on top of that just a really human element. At the end of the day, when you cannot be together in person, you really just need to use all of your available resources to stay in touch and to connect. Pick up the phone, start a Teams chat, open a Zoom meeting, send a text message. I mean, literally reach out in every way possible. Share your information, share your concerns, be very real, be very transparent, and don't be afraid to ask the very direct question. Not only of your suppliers, but of your key customers. What are your biggest worries? Where do we need to make sure that we are trying to shore up any potential holes or gaps? And just don't be afraid to just kind of put it out there. Because at the end of the day, we are all in this together. We all have a shared interest in making sure that this industry can continue to grow and roll and serve, because it's essential and it's really meaningful. And so really just that human element of it, of just literally picking up the phone and reaching out, texting on a random, Friday afternoon, late evening, and just saying, hey, I'm just checking in. Those are all, I think, really important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges too in this environment too is more emails. And with more emails, sometimes there becomes less communication, more confusion. Yeah. And so I think those are some good reminders of just reaching out and making sure we're taking those extra steps. And maybe it's not always a formal, Zoom or WebEx meeting. It's actually making that personal call again, just to make sure what you understand is out there.
It's interesting because I didn't think there could be more emails, but there are before this. Just to one more point to Jody's excellent point around the human contact piece. I think one of the things that we've relied on very, very heavily now is the technology actually that we're using today, right? This video chat. And what's interesting is this technology isn't new. It didn't just surface. It's been around, but culturally we were flying around the world and we were meeting with people face to face. And I think the issue that took place last year with COVID is it forced the human contact to kind of use the technology that's in place. And I think that's a big lesson. Maybe we don't want to rely on it completely, but culturally now, everyone is very comfortable with video conferencing, which I don't know if we were all utilizing it before.
That's a good point. And that was actually one of my questions I wanted to go on to, as in the words of Rahm Emanuel, you never let a crisis go to waste. It's an opportunity to do things you could not do before. With respect to the COVID crisis, was there something your team moved quicker on? And, obviously one, as Brandy's mentioning, is, kind of the WebEx tools and such. But Victor, from your perspective, how have you taken the crisis and made it somewhat of an opportunity in some ways?
That's a great question, Howard. How have we made the crisis an opportunity? If you could do that, I think we all learned that there's a great deal that is possible in non-traditional kind of working relationships and locations. And, we had 700 people in our company working from home. And now we're trying to figure out, well, how do we get back to normal? And when we're working through and doing a lot of benchmarking with our customers and elsewhere, we may not get back to normal because there's a significant portion of those people that are working from home that want to continue to work from home. And quite frankly, we feel like they've been pretty effective in doing it. At the same time, we've got the people that have had to come. We've kind of basically said, you're involved in production, you have to, come to work, but we're not going to bring other people into that plant. And so in some cases, they feel like, well, all the pressure is on them, and they have to pick up a lot of the in-person work that the people that are home don't have. And so we have to work through those challenges. But I ultimately believe that we're going to be a better company, and we're going to create an environment where people can do their best work, because we're going to try to tailor the situation to how do we continue to keep people safe, minimize risk in the facilities, and at the same time give people options to kind of be effective either at home or at work. And I think that's going to help us in the war for talent going forward. So I'm really excited about the possibilities.
Randy, what do you see as far as opportunities taken out of the crisis here?
Well, I kind of highlighted a little bit before, but I think one of the things in regards to how work gets done is we don't necessarily need to get on an airplane and fly around the world and get everybody together in meetings, and which was taking up a considerable amount of time. I think we can rely and we can adjust a bit more on when that's needed, and that if folks are calling in on video or on the phone, I think historically that just didn't resonate as well in meetings and connecting. And I think now, because we're so used to this technology and making things happen, that was a big lesson learned, that we really don't need to meet face to face as much as we thought we did. And so that was kind of a nice lesson learned from this as well. And also this whole conversation around resiliency, how the teams work together, whether it's the suppliers with us and us with our customers, to try to resolve and work through each new challenge as it surfaced, was inspirational quite a bit, because we think these challenges that are coming at us right now, we're working through them, we're figuring them out, and it's been a nice surprise on how high we can reach as a team and what we can do in the name of resiliency.
Do you see anything also just more strategically stepping back that, as you have had the time to focus on some things that, transformationally you see that you're able to get focus around and perhaps you hadn't in the prior environment?
The focus, like I said, we were able to really focus on our continuity plans. As things just kind of came to a grinding halt, we actually took a step back and said, how do we want to treat employees in this environment? And we made a very strategic decision as a company that we would not make any hiring or firing changes at all within the company, so all employees felt secure. So there were some really interesting approaches that we took, and it was an opportunity to take a step back and say, how do we want to be as a company? What kind of leaders do we want to be for the organization? And we feel that will be a long-term play for us in regards to the employee base and how they react as we continue to work through some of these issues that we have right now. So, but I will tell you, the other thing we didn't do is we didn't really stop a lot of the transformational work that we have in play, which we kind of stood up as a company for continuous improvement. So we're continuing to invest in new manufacturing locations. We're continuing to invest in transformation in our warehouse operations, investments in buildings, investments in robotics, and investments in new product introduction. So, those are decisions that we just at the time took a step back and said, what are we going to do or what are we not going to do? And so I'm pretty proud of the company and how we kind of made some decisions around employees and investments that we would maintain while we work through a lot of these resiliency issues. I think overall, we didn't expect it to last as long. So that was kind of a key lesson I think everybody is realizing, but it's part of the resiliency. So.
Thanks. Jody, from your perspective?
Yeah. I think it's absolutely true that we can all say that we definitely fast-tracked the use of our digital tools and increased usage of our digital resources, and that kind of digitization of our businesses has definitely been kind of, accelerated during this time. But I also think one of the really interesting things, anytime you have a crisis or a challenge, is to really see how teams come together and see how people, getting and don't take anything for granted, don't assume anything, make sure that you are getting in touch early and stay in touch, making sure that those connections, and I think watching teams go to work in a time that's challenging is really fascinating, and it helps to bring everybody together in a much closer, tighter knit way. Trying to make sure that we can maneuver really early and quickly and have that sense of urgency and that sense of purpose, not just for the whole grand scheme of things, but for really saying, okay, we've got to come together, we've got to solve this problem that's right ahead of us. There's other problems that are probably going to crop up tomorrow. And so I think that that is one of those things that kind of comes out of this situation, is you really get a sense of the people that you're working with, and you really get a sense of kind of the true merits of everybody kind of pulling together in that teamwork. And I think it just really helps to really truly reinforce the fact that our people in all of our organizations are truly our greatest asset, and really working together as a team is just incredibly rewarding and is ultimately the most successful in the end.
Yeah, that's a really important thing that I think, we've really seen as well, in that, there was a period about a year ago where, elective surgeries basically became almost non-existent for a couple of months. And people, I think across the board in the industry, at the suppliers, really stepped up across the board. I mean, you had people doing heroic things just to get to work, just to work safely. So I think, that was something that I would say was one of the most pleasing things I've seen over this period of time, was how everyone really came together. And then as the elective surgeries came back, taking whatever extra steps were needed. And I still see people doing that. I mean, I see people, pushing to the edge. And again, maybe this is part of that balance that we need to talk about with all the meetings, all the workload, still doing the transformational initiatives, which is great that people are willing to do heroic things for, the patients, the safety of our patients, making sure that they can continue to be ambulatory and have, access to elective surgeries at this point. But, it's just amazing what I've seen as well, I think, over this period of time, internally at our company, but I would also credit the suppliers, for some of the things that have been done. And, just relatively for our industry versus some others, I think we haven't had as many disruptions, depending on the type of products you provide. And again, that goes out to the suppliers planning activities, supply chain, working with your teams to make sure they're ready to step up to that next level. So as we look at this, and hopefully, the vaccinations now are accelerating in the US, right? It looks like, we've got 33% of Americans receiving their first dose at this time and 25% fully vaccinated. We do see some still troubling signs with 9 hospitals in Michigan as we speak in their ICUs. They're at 99 to 100% capacity. The British variant of the virus has now become the dominant virus in the US. But hopefully, with the vaccines rolling out, and we see, the world continue to move in that direction, we'll get the pandemic behind us. Victor, as you look at it, what is a COVID lesson learned that you will continue to follow after the pandemic is behind us?
That's a great question. What is a COVID lesson learned? Well, I liked Brandy's message around keeping the pedal to the metal, managing the crisis, but at the same time, continuing to invest, continuing to do what we do, continuous improvement. Last year we deployed over $35 million in capital for productivity and to improve our performance. At the same time, we did over 200 Kaizens across the company. So I'm really proud of that. Well, one of the things I think was most pivotal in keeping us focused through all of this was I really took our communications to another level. My style, I consider myself a kind of out in front leader. And so I'm used to going to plants and doing the Gemba walks and doing the town halls. And all of a sudden, a major part of my style was gone. And so we had to do something about that. And so we brought in a top flight communications firm, and they helped us focus our message. And I sent out weekly letters to our organization that were way better than anything I could write. You know, they were my kind of ideas and thoughts, but they were just well communicated. We got a lot of great feedback from those. We continue to do our monthly communications meetings, but they were much more structured around being safe and our business continuity plans and how we're doing. And also a major theme around, please keep yourself and your family safe. And we kept that drum beat throughout the year. And so I'm also proud that over the 3,000 employees that we have, we only had around 200 cases across the company. And I think part of it was we just kind of kept safety in our communications throughout the company.
Thanks, Victor. Brandy, from your perspective, what's a COVID lesson learned that you will continue to follow after the pandemic is finally behind us?
You know, people often talk a lot about leadership, and leadership's talked a lot about all the time. I think the biggest lesson learned for me during the COVID, I'll call crisis, and now even I'll call COVID hangover in supply chain that we're experiencing, is how incredibly important it is to maintain good leadership and make sure that folks know that you're supporting them. And the leadership principles that we talk about really, really have to come into play when things get really tense. That's the true measure of a leader. And to me, it's even more important. And that requires you as a leader and your team to take a few moments to take a step back and maybe take an hour, go for a walk. You really have some balance. You know, it's just really present right now on how important it is to maintain the things that you've been working your whole life to be a good leader on, that now's the time to really demonstrate that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
Jody, from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to extend on what Brandy was saying, you know, yes, of course, having a super, solid set of a foundation, whether it's financial or risk mitigation plans or business continuity plans, is incredibly important. But from just a pure leadership perspective, I think for me, the personal lesson was that I think we always expect that we will always have the answer. And as executive leaders, that we're supposed to have the plan and the answer to every situation. And that's not really realistic. We have to make sure that we do communicate, and we communicate even we don't necessarily have a very specific solution or we know exactly what's going to happen next. And I think that's really important, that communication and that trust and that transparency, and, kind of giving yourself the grace to say, well, I don't exactly know. I mean, normally we have this is exactly the plan. This is our long-term plan. This is what we're going to do the next 5 years. I mean, down to the wire. And this was one of those scenarios where you simply could not have that. And so you have to be, again, I sound like a broken record here, but you've got to be flexible and entrepreneurial. You've got to use your resources, keep your eyes and ears open, communicate. But at the end of the day, there's not going to be a playbook for how you have to do this. And there's not a roadmap, and you're ultimately going to have to build one. And people need to know that. And we're going to do it together, and it's going to be just fine. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but we're going to get to the other side, and we're going to be stronger because of it.
Yeah, I love the message, Jody. And I tell you, we definitely had to do a gut check over here. It's almost like a case study, in a business school where we had that first infection in a facility. And then the question is, well, what do you do? Do you shut the whole facility down? Do you clean up? We were really in new territory. There wasn't a microbiologist on the staff. And so what we did is we said, we don't know. But we also said, no one's going to catch COVID or, God forbid, die because we made the wrong decision. We didn't use the facts and the science. And so we brought in a science advisor who really helped us navigate, what we should do under which cases. And then we put that person out in front of the team too, to build confidence that their leadership team was listening to the science. And I felt like that was a real kind of gut check. And, basically I don't know it all. And, we have to rely on someone who knows what they're doing.
Thanks, Victor. As you're talking about flexibility, and as you look at your team members and the things that you've been working on, we started a little bit on this vein earlier about just, WebEx overload or too many Zooms and everything else. But as you look at that, I mean, just shifting gears a little bit beyond supply chain resiliency to team member resiliency, maybe just to open that up a little bit along the line of, is there something that you're doing as far as personal development, as far as working with your team members that, is allowing them to continue, to grow in their roles when there's so much stress and other things going on and, in regards to it. Brandy, is there anything, particular you'd like to share of how you make sure the career development paths are still continuing when you don't have that, leadership discussion over the water cooler or the coffee machine?
Yeah.
So we've actually done a couple things. The first is one of our key objectives is to really be a bit more robust on every employee's development plan. And we've got those tools, but they tend to, just kind of either if they're filled out, it's kind of, just kind of filled out, but we've put it as a key objective this year. So if you think about all the other things we've got focused on, that one being added to the list of priorities is really kind of been helpful. The second thing is we have not stopped our investment in our leadership development programs that we have. We've got quite a few very good ones, and we've nominated some of our key leaders, and we're continuing that program as well. And so they're starting and kicking some of those off. So continued investment in development plans, in executive leadership training, and those kind of things. And then the final thing that we've been able to do is we've had leadership. Although we can't meet as a leadership team, that actually is a value add to get out together, get on an airplane, and meet on a fairly regular basis as leaders. I think that is a key element that has been missing, particularly if there's new team members who've never even met each other. So that one, we've really struggled to try to figure out how do we do that, how do we support that? And we've had some third-party consultants that we've been working with that are working through very targeted team building sessions. I don't know if these are all things that haven't been thought of before, but what we didn't do was stop doing those things during the time period while we're still trying to run around and solve all of these supply chain issues and come up with new solutions when there is a COVID case or whatever that is. We've kept those things going, knowing that that's important.
Jody, how about from your standpoint?
That's a great question. I think, as part of our business continuity and disaster recovery plan, we already had kind of line items and risk analysis based on key employees, critical employees, both in leadership as well as technical. But one of the things that we really activated throughout the course of this year was doing kind of a realistic, across all of our operating sites, succession planning for, okay, if this person is unable, who's the first, second, third option for doing all of these different key tasks. And that included not only the critical leadership, but also key technical personnel. And that was a really good exercise because it's one of those things where it's just important to have. And it's always, as you said earlier, Brandy, in the back of your head, it's always important to have, but then you think to yourself, it might be that third or fourth level importance. But I think really highlighted for us this year how important it is to have that and to be able to have a developing bench or a deep bench, or to be able to identify any gaps that you might have. And that's another thing that we're doing extensively now across our global organization, is really a full gap analysis of both process and technical competence, and aligning that with where do we think we need to be and where are we now, and then what's the path to fill it. It sounds pretty simple, but it's one of those things where it's really important to do that exercise. It's not simple at all, but that helps us to identify those specific gaps and then work to develop them, work to then build up the team and be able to invest internally within our businesses and our people. And then if we find that that's not possible or that is not a competency, to figure out where we can locate that particular competency.
Great. Victor?
Those are great. Love to hear those responses. And we're on a similar journey around how do we leverage our talent, continue to develop our team. And so the succession planning and all those things are certainly things that we're doing. We're also, we had started before the pandemic and we're just kind of turbocharging it, is just this, how do we create this environment where people can do their best work? It started with engagement surveys. And now that we have our engagement survey and we benchmark where it was in the past, we have teams in each of the facilities that are developing their own, looking at their own data, developing their own initiatives, and we've got all of that under the umbrella at the corporate level, making a lot of progress on engagement in the company. That's a big, important one. I think the other thing too is just one thing I'm trying to figure out is how do we do a better job in this environment where it's kind of a nonstop from 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock Zoom call, and how do we kind of get people? And I tell you, it just wears me out. I'm exhausted right now, and so what can we do about that? And so we've done things like we do these kind of cocktail hours where we get like the sales team together or my staff, and we'll do a cocktail hour. For Christmas, I basically sent out all my staff a basket of cheese and meats and a glass of wine or a bottle of wine and a bottle opener, and we all kind of ate the same cheese and crackers and drank the same wine and had a nice couple of hours together. So trying to do more of those things. I'm not world class in this one. We've got to figure out how do we kind of manage this environment with the Zoom environment and do a better job continuing to motivate people, because it is stressful. And people work for hours after work, as I think Brandy talked about. People are working around the clock. You're working home anyway, the computer's there. And I find myself doing it. We've got to figure out what to do about this.
And you're just hoping, that we're going to get past this and we can do the next reboot and move on back to, that some of that, face-to-face, some of that, togetherness that you just can't do quite as well virtually. But I do want to also put in one thing here too, with respect to OMTEC, it always is a great opportunity for education. And I guess one of the advantages of the Zoom WebEx world is, the travel costs go down. So there is an opportunity this year to fully participate in the education sessions with OMTEC. And that's always at a very high standard level, I think, for our teams. And likewise, and I know Brandy's been engaged in it before, is the Institute of Supply Management. We're sending our sourcing supply chain folks to the upcoming virtual conference there. Again, it's not quite the same of being there in person with the speakers, networking. But on the other hand, that's one of the things I think we've kind of made the lemonade out of the proverbial lemons is how do you selectively do the development priorities with people and make sure they do still take advantage of some of the online training, which they can do on their own, as far as some things, as far as getting their degree or getting some sort of certification still, or great education that, is, very germane to their roles, like what OMTEC puts on every year. Brandy, did you want to comment on that at all, as far as the virtual kind of education in that area?
Yeah, I think, Howard, we've learned so much on how quickly culturally we can change in this industry based on whatever comes in that day that's new. And I think, learning different ways for training, but not, but still continuing to support and invest in training is just a key lesson from all of this. So,
Jody, if there's one thing you would say, as you would go forward and say, okay, how do we, kind of as Victor was saying, hey, it's a nonstop world, we're not quite, we're not slowing down on transformation, other things. What would you say to them as you look forward, as far as, what would be the most important thing to keep in mind to do this on a sustainable level? Right. It's one thing to do a marathon, but then to have another marathon right behind it.
Right.
Well, how do you, as a key global leader, how would you tell your team, okay, hey, and you touched on it a little bit before, but, I guess just as we close here, what would be the words you would give them to keep the faith?
Oh, I think for me, it's easy because we're in the most amazing industry, right? Just letting people know that they are important, their work is valuable, and what they do makes a meaningful difference every day in the lives of tens of thousands of millions of people. And so I think we're very lucky being in the industry that we are in, because it automatically gives you that sense of we're needed, we need to do this. And there's so many lives that are depending upon our work and our good work. And of course, we have to have a balance, and it's important because otherwise we will be burnt out. We will not do our best work. So, but I think it's incredibly satisfying. And one of the reasons that I personally chose to come into this industry, many decades ago, more than I care to admit, is because it is truly meaningful. And it is one of those things that when things get tough and when things get difficult, if you know what you're doing is meaningful and it moves the needle every day, it's going to keep you going. And that's going to be a very sustainable type of role. So that's from my perspective, that's really, it all comes down to that. And then honestly, loving the people that you work with. You're going to spend a lot of time with those folks, whether on Zoom or in person, and just genuinely respecting and appreciating and enjoying the people that you work with is incredibly important.
Thanks, Jody. I don't think there's any better way to end our resiliency panel with those words of, you do matter. You make a huge contribution, whether you're at an OEM or a supplier. And thank you for doing that every day and making a meaningful difference with our patients, with the hospitals, giving people a better way of life and contributing significantly in that regard. So thank you to everyone out there who joined us for the panel today. Thank you to our panelists, Brandy Moranian, Jody Gilmore, and Victor Swent. A great discussion today from the group, and I hope you enjoyed the panel, and hopefully maybe you got some tips here on how to reboot, how to keep going in face of a marathon a little bit, it seems like at times, and again, knowing you make a difference. So thanks, everybody. Have a great
Nice job, Howard. Nice job, team.
have a great
Thanks,
spring
Thank you all
and
so
summer
much.
as we go forward.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Absolutely.
Thank you to our supply chain for their excellent discussion. Thank you to Millstone Medical Outsourcing for sponsoring this session. And thank you to those who are watching. To access more from OMTEC's virtual education series, visit omtecexpo.com.